Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on reading people well, but the woman next door made her skin crawl for reasons she couldn't explain. There was something behind Emma's perfectly white smile that felt like staring into an empty room. The feeling started 3 weeks ago when Emma moved into the blue Victorian house next to Sarah's modest 2-bedroom rental. At first, Sarah thought she was being paranoid. After all, Emma seemed like the ideal neighbor, always waving from her garden, bringing over homemade cookies, offering to help with groceries. But every interaction left Sarah feeling drained, like Emma was studying her reactions rather than genuinely connecting. Sarah worked as a crisis counselor at the local community center, so she'd learned to trust her instincts about people. Her job involved talking to abuse survivors, addicts in recovery, and families in crisis. She knew what genuine emotion looked like, and she knew what it looked like when someone was performing. Emma was definitely performing, but the question was why. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah was running late for work. She'd overslept after staying up too late reading case files, and she was frantically loading her car when she heard Emma's voice float over the fence. "Sarah, honey, you look absolutely exhausted. Are you taking care of yourself?" The words were concerned, but Emma's tone had an odd quality to it, almost pleased, like she was savoring Sarah's stress. When Sarah looked up, Emma was standing at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach twist. "I'm fine," Sarah called back, forcing a smile. "Just one of those mornings." Emma's smile widened, and for a split second, Sarah could have sworn she saw satisfaction in those pale blue eyes. It was the look of someone who had just confirmed a hypothesis. That evening, Sarah found herself researching her new neighbor online. Emma Chen, 34, worked in pharmaceutical sales, recently divorced, no kids. Her social media profiles were perfectly curated, vacation photos from exotic locations, pictures of elaborate home-cooked meals, selfies with designer handbags, but something felt off about the images. They looked staged, like Emma was creating a character rather than documenting her life. The second incident happened 3 days later. Sarah was walking her elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson's dog while the woman recovered from hip surgery. As they passed Emma's house, Sarah noticed the front door was slightly open. She could hear voices inside, Emma's laugh, bright and musical, followed by a man's deeper voice. But when the man spoke again, his tone had changed. He sounded upset, maybe even frightened. Sarah slowed her pace, trying to look casual while straining to hear. "Please, Emma, I can't keep doing this," the man said. His voice cracked with what sounded like desperation. "You're asking too much." Emma's response was too quiet to make out, but her tone was soothing, almost hypnotic. The man's voice came again, weaker now. I know you're right. I'm sorry." When Sarah passed the house again 20 minutes later, the man was leaving. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, but he moved like someone who'd been beaten down. His shoulders were hunched, and he kept glancing back at Emma's door as if he expected her to call him back. Emma stood in her doorway, watching him go with that same satisfied expression Sarah had seen before. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd witnessed something important. The man's fear had been real, but what could Emma have done to cause it? She seemed so small and harmless, with her flower garden and her constant baking. But Sarah had learned in her work that the most dangerous people were often the ones who looked the least threatening. The next morning, Sarah decided to do something she'd never done before. She was going to watch Emma as carefully as Emma seemed to be watching everyone else. She had no idea that she was about to discover the 7 warning signs that psychologists use to identify a psychopath, and that her own life was about to become Emma's next experiment. Sarah's opportunity to observe Emma came sooner than expected. On Thursday evening, she heard sirens wailing down their quiet street. From her living room window, she watched as an ambulance pulled up to the house 3 doors down, the Hendersons' place. Mrs. Henderson was elderly and lived alone since her husband died last year. Sarah grabbed her jacket and hurried outside, joining the small crowd of neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. Emma was already there, standing at the edge of the group with her arms crossed. What struck Sarah immediately was Emma's expression. While everyone else looked concerned or worried, Emma seemed almost curious. Her eyes were bright with interest, like she was watching an entertaining movie rather than a medical emergency. "What happened?" Sarah asked Mrs. Chun from across the street. "I heard Dorothy fell in her bathroom," Mrs. Chun whispered, wringing her hands. "Poor thing was there for hours before her daughter found her." Sarah's heart clenched with sympathy. Mrs. Henderson was such a sweet woman, always stopping to chat about her garden. Emma stepped closer to their conversation. "Oh, how terrible," she said, her voice dripping with concern. But something about her tone felt rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a play. "I hope she be okay. She's such a lovely woman." The words were appropriate, but they came out too smooth, too practiced. Sarah noticed that Emma's eyes kept darting toward the ambulance, watching as the paramedics wheeled Mrs. Henderson out on a stretcher. As the ambulance drove away, the neighbors began to disperse. Sarah was about to head back inside when she heard Emma talking to Mr. Rodriguez from next to the Hendersons' house. "You know, I've been worried about Dorothy for weeks," Emma was saying. "She seemed so frail lately. I kept thinking something like this might happen." Her voice carried just the right note of gentle concern. But Sarah caught something else underneath, a hint of satisfaction, as if Emma was pleased to have her prediction proven right. The next day, Sarah visited Mrs. Henderson in the hospital. The elderly woman was bruised, but in good spirits, grateful for the visit. "You're so kind to come see me, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, patting Sarah's hand. "Not many people my age have visitors anymore." They chatted for a while about Mrs. Henderson's recovery when the conversation turned to neighbors. "That new girl next to you stopped by yesterday evening," Mrs. Henderson mentioned. "Emma, I think. She brought flowers and seemed so concerned about my fall." Mrs. Henderson's expression grew thoughtful. "It was nice of her, but something felt strange about it. She kept asking very specific questions about exactly how I fell, how long I was on the floor, whether I was conscious the whole time. It felt less like sympathy and more like... She paused, searching for the right word. Like she was gathering details for a story. Sarah's stomach tightened. What kind of questions? Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her hospital bed. She wanted to know if I called out for help, if I thought anyone could hear me, how scared I was lying there. When I started getting upset talking about it, she didn't seem to notice. She just kept asking more questions, like my distress was invisible to her. This revelation bothered Sarah more than she wanted to admit. When she returned home that evening, she found Emma watering her front garden. "Hi, neighbor," Emma called out cheerfully. "How was your day?" Sarah decided to test something. "I just came back from visiting Mrs. Henderson in the hospital," she said, watching Emma's reaction carefully. Emma's face immediately arranged itself into an expression of concern. "Oh, how is the poor thing? I've been so worried about her." But Sarah noticed that Emma's eyes didn't match her words. There was no real warmth there, no genuine distress about an elderly neighbor's suffering. It was like watching someone put on a mask. "She's doing better," Sarah said. "She mentioned you visited her." That was thoughtful. Emma's smile grew wider. "Of course, I felt so terrible about what happened. I kept thinking about how scared she must have been, lying there helpless for all those hours." The way Emma said helpless sent a chill down Sarah's spine. There was something almost hungry in her tone, like she was savoring the word. That night, Sarah found herself researching psychopathy symptoms online. What she read made her blood run cold. Shallow emotions, lack of empathy, superficial charm. Emma was checking every box. But the most disturbing thing was how normal Emma seemed on the surface. She realized that this was exactly what made psychopaths so dangerous. They could mimic appropriate emotions perfectly while feeling nothing at all. Sarah was beginning to understand that her neighbor wasn't just odd or socially awkward. Emma was something much more frightening, someone who could simulate human connection while being fundamentally incapable of experiencing it. And now Emma's attention was turning toward Sarah herself, studying her reactions, testing her boundaries. Sarah had the growing suspicion that she was about to become Emma's next psychological experiment. The revelation about Emma's true nature hit Sarah like a freight train the following week. It started with a seemingly innocent conversation at the local coffee shop where Sarah often worked on her case notes. She was sitting in her usual corner booth when Emma appeared, sliding into the seat across from her without invitation. "Mind if I join you?" Emma asked, though she was already settling in with her latte. "I saw you from across the room and thought it would be nice to chat." Sarah looked up from her laptop, immediately uncomfortable with the intrusion, but not wanting to be rude. "Of course," she said, closing her computer screen. "How are you settling into the neighborhood?" Emma's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh, I absolutely love it here, though I have to say, most of the neighbors are quite simple." The way she said the word simple carried a subtle condescension that made Sarah's skin crawl. Present company excluded, of course, Emma added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're clearly more intelligent than the average person around here. Sarah felt a chill at the casual way Emma dismissed their neighbors. I think our neighbors are lovely people, she said carefully. Mrs. Patterson has lived here for 40 years and knows more about this community than anyone. Emma waved her hand dismissively. Oh, she's sweet enough, but let's be honest, she's not exactly operating on our level, is she? Some people are just limited in their capacity for complex thought. The arrogance in Emma's voice was stunning. She spoke about their neighbors like they were specimens in a lab, interesting but ultimately inferior. Sarah realized this was the first time she'd seen Emma drop her mask of perfect friendliness, revealing something much uglier underneath. "What do you do for work again?" Sarah asked, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Emma's posture straightened with obvious pride. "I'm in pharmaceutical sales, but I'm not your typical sales rep. I have a master's degree in biochemistry from Stanford." She paused, clearly expecting Sarah to be impressed. "Most people in my field barely understand the products they're selling. I could probably teach the doctors a thing or two about the medications they prescribe." Sarah nodded politely, but something about Emma's claim felt off. "That must be challenging work," she said. "Dealing with different types of people all day." Emma's smile turned predatory. "Oh, people are so easy to read once you understand their basic motivations. Fear, greed, insecurity. Push the right buttons and you can make anyone do anything you want." The casual way Emma talked about manipulating people sent alarm bells ringing in Sarah's head. "That sounds a bit cynical," Sarah said, testing the waters. Emma laughed, a sound that was musical but somehow cold. "Cynical? I prefer realistic. Most people are emotional creatures driven by primitive needs. When you're operating on a higher intellectual level, you can see their patterns clearly. It's like being the only adult in a room full of children." Sarah excused herself as soon as possible, but Emma's words echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. The sheer arrogance of her worldview was breathtaking. Emma genuinely believed she was superior to everyone around her, smarter and more capable than the simple people she surrounded herself with. It was a level of grandiosity that bordered on delusional. That evening, Sarah decided to do some fact-checking. She used her access to professional databases through work to research Emma's background. What she found was troubling. Emma had indeed attended Stanford, but she'd been expelled in her final semester for academic misconduct. Her pharmaceutical sales job was real, but she worked for a small, questionable company that had been investigated for pushing experimental drugs with dangerous side effects. More disturbing were the gaps in Emma's employment history. There were long periods where she seemed to have no job at all, followed by sudden relocations to new cities. Each move corresponded with what looked like a fresh start, a new identity carefully constructed to hide whatever had happened in the previous location. The next day, Sarah ran into their mailman, Jerry, who had been delivering mail in the neighborhood for 15 years. "That new lady in the blue house," he said, shaking his head. "She's something else. Complained to my supervisor because I was 5 minutes late with her delivery. Said she was expecting important medication and that I was being unprofessional." Jerry lowered his voice. "Then she tried to tell me how to do my job, like she knew better than someone who's been walking this route for over a decade." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. Emma's grandiose sense of self-worth wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. She believed she was smarter than everyone else, more important, deserving of special treatment. This wasn't confidence. It was pathological narcissism combined with something much darker. Emma saw other people as props in her personal drama, existing only to serve her needs or validate her superiority. The most chilling realization was that Emma's inflated self-image made her unpredictable. If she truly believed she was superior to everyone around her, what would she do when someone challenged that belief? Sarah was beginning to suspect that Emma's perfect neighbor routine was just another way of demonstrating her superiority, showing how easily she could fool the simple people around her while hiding her true nature in plain sight. Sarah, as growing unease about Emma reached a breaking point when she discovered the extent of her neighbor as deception. It began with a casual conversation with Dr. Martinez, her supervisor at the community center, who mentioned meeting Sarah's neighbor at a local charity fundraiser. "Interesting woman," Dr. Martinez said during their weekly check-in. She introduced herself as Dr. Emma Chun, said she was a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma therapy. We talked shop for about 20 minutes. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Dr. Chun?" She repeated carefully. "Are you sure?" Dr. Martinez nodded. "Absolutely." She was very knowledgeable, quoted recent studies, seemed to know her stuff. She even offered to volunteer with our PTSD support groups. Sarah's mind raced. Emma had told her she worked in pharmaceutical sales with a biochemistry degree. Now she was claiming to be a psychiatrist? That night, Sarah decided to investigate further. She called her friend Jessica, who worked in hospital administration and had access to physician databases. "Can you check if there's a Dr. Emma Chun licensed to practice psychiatry in the state?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Jessica got back to her the next day. "No Emma Chun licensed as a psychiatrist anywhere in the state," she reported. "There's an Emma Chun who's a pediatric nurse in Sacramento, and another who's a veterinarian in San Francisco, but no psychiatrists. Why?" Sarah made an excuse about verifying credentials for a potential speaker, but her stomach was churning. Emma was lying about her profession, her qualifications, possibly everything. The lies began unraveling quickly after that. Sarah started paying closer attention to Emma's stories, and they never added up. One day, Emma mentioned growing up in Portland as an only child. A week later, she casually referenced her younger brother who lived in Seattle. When Sarah gently pointed out the discrepancy, Emma laughed it off. "Oh, I meant my stepbrother. My father remarried when I was 12. I sometimes forget to mention that part." But the lies went deeper than inconsistent family stories. Emma claimed to have traveled extensively for work, showing photos on her phone of exotic locations. But when Sarah looked closely, she noticed the photos had that generic stock photo quality, too perfect, too composed. One evening, she reverse-searched one of Emma's vacation photos online and found it on a travel website, watermarked by a professional photographer. The most disturbing lie came to light when Sarah overheard Emma talking to their neighbor Mr. Kim about her deceased husband. Sarah was in her backyard when she heard Emma's voice carrying over the fence, thick with emotion. "He died in a car accident 2 years ago," Emma was saying. "Drunk driver hit him head-on. I still have nightmares about getting that phone call from the hospital." Sarah felt genuine sympathy until she remembered Emma telling her just last week that she was recently divorced. When Sarah had asked about her ex-husband, Emma had described him as emotionally abusive and said she was glad to be free of him. Now he was supposedly dead? Sarah realized that Emma was tailoring her stories to whatever would get the strongest emotional reaction from her audience. The lies weren't just about big things either. Emma lied constantly about small, meaningless details. She claimed to be allergic to shellfish when declining Mrs. Patterson's crab cakes. Then Sarah saw her eating shrimp at the grocery store the next day. She told the mailman she was expecting urgent medical supplies, but Sarah noticed the packages were all from online shopping sites. She claimed to work late hours to explain her frequent absences, but her office building was dark when Sarah drove past it one evening. What made the lying even more unsettling was how effortless it seemed for Emma. She never hesitated, never seemed to worry about keeping her stories straight. The lies flowed from her lips as naturally as breathing, each one perfectly calibrated to the situation and the person she was talking to. Sarah realized that Emma wasn't just lying to get out of trouble or make herself look good. She was lying for the pure pleasure of manipulation. The breaking point came when Emma tried to lie to Sarah about something she'd witnessed herself. Sarah had seen Emma screaming at a delivery driver who had supposedly damaged her garden. But when Sarah mentioned it later, Emma claimed the interaction never happened. "I think you must be confused," Emma said with a concerned smile. "I've never raised my voice at anyone. Violence and conflict make me physically ill." Sarah stared at her neighbor, seeing clearly for the first time how dangerous Emma really was. This wasn't just casual dishonesty. It was pathological lying on a scale that suggested Emma had lost touch with reality itself. She lied so constantly and convincingly that Sarah wondered if Emma even knew the difference between truth and fiction anymore. More terrifying was the realization that Emma was studying Sarah's reactions to her lies, learning what worked and what didn't, refining her manipulation techniques like a scientist perfecting an experiment. Sarah began to understand that everything about Emma was constructed: her personality, her history, her emotions, even her name might be fake. She was living next door to someone who existed as a series of carefully crafted lies. And Sarah was becoming increasingly certain that she was being targeted for something much worse than casual deception. The true depth of Emma's cold nature revealed itself on a gray October morning when Sarah witnessed something that would haunt her for weeks. She was leaving early for work when she heard a commotion from Emma's backyard. Through the gaps in the fence, Sarah could see Emma standing over something on the ground, her posture tense with irritation rather than concern. As Sarah got closer to investigate, she realized what had happened. Emma's neighbor's cat, a gentle orange tabby named Muffin that belonged to elderly Mrs. Patterson, lay motionless near Emma's prized rose bushes. Sarah's heart sank as she saw the animal's twisted position and the obvious signs of trauma. The cat had clearly been severely injured, possibly killed. What made Sarah's blood run cold wasn't the accident itself. Sometimes terrible things happen to pets. It was Emma's reaction. Instead of rushing to help or showing any distress, Emma stood looking down at the dying animal with nothing more than mild annoyance, like someone who'd found trash blown into their yard. She nudged the cat with her foot, not to check if it was alive, but to see if it would stain her garden stones. "Emma," Sarah called out, climbing over the low fence. "What happened? Is Muffin okay?" Up close, Sarah could see the cat was still breathing, barely alive but suffering terribly. Its legs appeared to be broken, and there was blood matting its orange fur. Sarah's immediate instinct was to call a veterinarian, to do something, anything to help. Emma looked up with mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten other people might care about such things. "Oh, hi, Sarah. I found it like this about 10 minutes ago," she said casually, her tone suggesting she was discussing a minor inconvenience. "It must have gotten into my garden and fallen somehow. These outdoor cats are always getting into trouble." Sarah knelt beside the injured animal, her heart breaking at its weak mewing. "We need to get him to an emergency vet right away," she said, gently scooping up the cat. "He's still alive, Emma. We can save him." Emma's response chilled Sarah to the bone. Is it really worth the expense? It's just a cat, and it's pretty old anyway. Mrs. Patterson might be better off getting a younger one. The casual dismissal of suffering, the complete absence of empathy for a dying creature, struck Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at Emma, looking for some sign of normal human compassion, but found only cold calculation. Emma wasn't cruel in the sense of actively enjoying the cat's pain. She simply didn't register it as important enough to matter. Sarah rushed Muffin to the emergency veterinary clinic, where despite heroic efforts, the cat died from internal injuries. The vet mentioned that the trauma pattern was consistent with being struck by something heavy, possibly a garden tool. When Sarah returned to break the news to Mrs. Patterson, she found the elderly woman devastated by the loss of her beloved companion. "Muffin never wandered far from home," Mrs. Patterson sobbed. "He was afraid of new places. I can't understand how he would have ended up in Emma's garden." Sarah comforted her neighbor while a terrible suspicion grew in her mind. The injury pattern, Emma's lack of concern, the convenient explanation about the cat falling, none of it added up to an accident. Later that evening, Sarah watched from her window as Emma calmly hosed down her garden tools and put them away in her shed. There was no sign that she'd given the morning's tragedy another thought. When Mrs. Patterson knocked on Emma's door later to ask if she'd seen what happened to Muffin, Emma expressed perfectly appropriate sympathy while offering no additional information. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Emma said, her voice hitting all the right notes of concern. "Muffin was such a sweet cat. I wish I could have done more to help." The performance was flawless, but Sarah could see the emptiness behind Emma's eyes. She was reciting lines, playing the role of a caring neighbor while feeling absolutely nothing. The most disturbing part came the next day when Emma actually brought Mrs. Patterson a casserole and offered to help her look for a new pet. "I know it won't replace Muffin," Emma said with apparent sincerity, "but maybe a younger cat would be easier for you to manage." Sarah watched this interaction with growing horror, realizing that Emma was not only untroubled by what she'd done, she was actually enjoying the aftermath. The opportunity to play the helpful neighbor while Mrs. Patterson grieved. When Sarah tried to probe gently about what might have happened, Emma's story never varied. She'd simply found the cat injured in her garden. No guilt, no second-guessing, no emotional distress about the situation. It was as if the entire incident had been deleted from her emotional memory while remaining perfectly clear in her factual recall. Sarah began to understand that Emma wasn't just lacking in empathy. She was completely incapable of remorse. She could intellectually understand that hurting animals was wrong, could perfectly mimic appropriate responses, but she felt no actual guilt or regret about her actions. This wasn't someone who made mistakes and felt bad about them. This was someone who could cause tremendous harm and sleep soundly afterward, troubled only by the inconvenience of having to clean up the evidence. The realization that Emma felt no genuine remorse for anything she did was perhaps the most terrifying discovery yet. It meant there were no internal checks on her behavior, no conscience holding her back from whatever served her purposes. Sarah was living next door to someone who could commit terrible acts and feel nothing afterward except satisfaction at having avoided consequences. Sarah's understanding of Emma's true nature crystallized when she observed how her neighbor interacted with the revolving door of people in her life. Unlike normal individuals who formed deep, lasting connections, Emma seemed to collect people like trophies, discarding them once they'd served their purpose or seen too much of her real self. The pattern became clear when Sarah noticed that Emma's frequent visitors were never the same people twice. There was the well-dressed businessman who came by every Tuesday for about a month, always looking increasingly haggard with each visit. Then he disappeared entirely, replaced by a young woman who worked at the bank downtown. Sarah watched this woman's transformation from eager friendship to obvious discomfort over the course of several weeks before she too vanished from Emma's life. Sarah's opportunity to understand Emma's relationship patterns came when she ran into one of these former visitors at the grocery store. The woman, Jennifer, recognized Sarah from the neighborhood and struck up a conversation. "You live next to Emma, right?" Jennifer asked, her expression darkening. "I used to be friends with her. Used to be." Jennifer's story was both fascinating and disturbing. Emma was amazing at first, she explained as they stood in the produce section. She seemed so interested in my life, asked all the right questions, remembered every detail I told her. I thought I'd found my best friend. Jennifer's voice grew bitter. But then I realized she wasn't actually sharing anything real about herself. I knew everything about Emma's supposedly tragic childhood, her brilliant career, her exciting social life, but none of it was true. The revelation that came next made Sarah's stomach turn. Jennifer had discovered Emma's lies when she offered to help plan a surprise party for Emma's birthday. I called her sister to coordinate, Jennifer said, only to find out Emma doesn't have a sister. Then I called her workplace and discovered she'd been fired months earlier for falsifying sales reports. Everything she'd told me about her life was completely fabricated. But the most chilling part of Jennifer's story was what happened when she confronted Emma about the lies. She didn't deny anything, Jennifer said, shaking her head in disbelief. She just looked at me like I was being unreasonable for expecting the truth. Then she started analyzing me, pointing out all my insecurities and flaws with surgical precision. She knew exactly where to hurt me because I trusted her with my deepest fears. Sarah learned that Emma had used Jennifer's confessions against her, weaponizing every vulnerability Jennifer had shared during their supposed friendship. She told me I was pathetic for caring so much about honesty, that I was too emotionally needy to handle a sophisticated relationship. She made me feel like I was the problem for expecting basic human decency. This conversation prompted Sarah to investigate Emma's other relationships more carefully. She started noticing patterns in the brief interactions she witnessed. Emma's relationships followed a predictable cycle. Initial love bombing with excessive attention and apparent understanding, followed by gradual exploitation of the person's weaknesses, and finally complete discarding once the person either became too demanding or saw through Emma's facade. The mailman Jerry provided another piece of the puzzle. She tried to get me to tell her which houses received the most packages, he confided to Sarah one afternoon. Said she was thinking about starting a neighborhood watch, but something felt off about it. Then she offered to make me lunch if I'd show her some of the addresses on my route. When I said no, she got this look in her eyes like I'd personally insulted her. Sarah realized that Emma didn't form genuine relationships at all. She created elaborate simulations of friendship and intimacy, but they were all designed to extract something from the other person: information, services, emotional validation, or simply the pleasure of manipulation itself. Emma had no capacity for the give and take of real human connection, because she fundamentally couldn't understand other people as anything more than objects to be used. The saddest example was Mrs. Patterson, who still believed Emma was genuinely caring about her welfare. Sarah watched Emma visit the elderly woman regularly, bringing food and offering to help with errands. But she noticed that Emma always steered conversations toward Mrs. Patterson's finances, her medical appointments, her family relationships. Emma was mining information, not providing comfort. During one of these visits, Sarah overheard Emma offering to help Mrs. Patterson with her banking. "These online systems are so confusing for your generation," Emma said with false sympathy. "I'd be happy to help you set up automatic payments. Maybe review your accounts to make sure everything's organized properly." Sarah felt sick realizing that Emma was positioning herself to gain access to a vulnerable elderly woman's finances. The most disturbing realization was that Emma seemed to enjoy the process of building fake relationships just as much as exploiting them. She appeared to get genuine pleasure from fooling people, from making them believe she cared, while feeling absolutely nothing. It was like watching someone play an elaborate video game where other people were just NPCs to be manipulated for points. Sarah understood now that Emma was incapable of real intimacy or genuine connection. Her relationships were all calculated performances designed to serve her needs, while providing entertainment through the process of deception. Everyone in Emma's life was disposable, valuable only as long as they could be used. This wasn't just antisocial behavior. It was a complete absence of the basic human capacity for love, friendship, or authentic emotional connection. The knowledge that Emma saw all relationships as opportunities for exploitation made Sarah realize how dangerous her own position had become. She was no longer just an observer of Emma's behavior. She was becoming a target. Sarah's worst fears about Emma were confirmed when she discovered the true scope of her neighbor's criminal activities. It started with a phone call from Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who introduced herself as investigating financial fraud cases in their area. "We've had reports of identity theft targeting elderly residents," the detective explained. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson's name came up as a potential victim. We understand you work with vulnerable populations, so we hoped you might have some insights." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. "What kind of identity theft?" she asked, though she was already dreading the answer. Detective Rodriguez explained that someone had been systematically accessing elderly residents' personal information, opening credit accounts in their names, and even filing fraudulent insurance claims. The operation was sophisticated, suggesting someone with inside knowledge of financial systems. That evening, Sarah decided to do something that terrified her but felt necessary. She climbed onto her roof under the pretense of checking her gutters and positioned herself where she could see into Emma's house through the upstairs windows. What she observed made her stomach churn with fear and disgust. Emma's supposedly perfect home was actually a command center for multiple criminal enterprises. Sarah could see several computer monitors displaying what looked like databases of personal information. There were stacks of documents, fake identification cards scattered across a desk, and what appeared to be stolen mail sorted into neat piles. Emma moved between these materials with practiced efficiency, like someone who'd been running cons for years. The next day, Sarah called Detective Rodriguez back with her concerns about Emma. "I can't prove anything," Sarah admitted, "but I think you should look into my neighbor, Emma Chun. She's been unusually interested in Mrs. Patterson's financial situation, and there are things about her background that don't add up." The detective took notes and promised to investigate. Within a week, Detective Rodriguez called Sarah back with shocking news. "Emma Chun isn't her real name," the detective revealed. We've identified her as Emma Walsh, wanted in 3 states for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. She's been moving from city to city, targeting vulnerable communities for the past 5 years. Sarah learned that Emma's pharmaceutical sales job was fake. Her education credentials were forged, and even her apartment lease was obtained using stolen identity documents. The scope of Emma's criminal activity was staggering. She'd been running romance scams online, defrauding lonely people out of their savings while pretending to be in love with them. She'd been stealing prescription medications from elderly neighbors and selling them online. She'd even been claiming deceased relatives' Social Security benefits using forged death certificates and fake family relationships. But what made Emma truly dangerous wasn't just the variety of her crimes, it was her complete lack of specialization. Most criminals developed expertise in one area, but Emma was a criminal generalist, willing to commit any type of crime that presented an opportunity. She stole from the elderly, manipulated the lonely defrauded businesses, and even engaged in insurance fraud by staging minor accidents. Detective Rodriguez revealed that Emma's pattern was to embed herself in communities as the perfect neighbor, using her charm and fake credentials to gain trust. Then she would systematically exploit every vulnerable person within reach before disappearing to start the cycle again in a new location. She's probably been planning her exit strategy since the day she moved in, the detective warned. The most chilling detail was that Emma had been escalating. Her early crimes were relatively minor financial fraud, but her recent activities showed increasing boldness and cruelty. In her last location, she'd convinced a cancer patient to sign over power of attorney, then emptied the woman's accounts while she was undergoing chemotherapy. The woman had died penniless and alone because Emma had also isolated her from family members who might have helped. Sarah realized that Emma's interest in her wasn't random. As a crisis counselor, Sarah had access to vulnerable people and confidential information. Emma had probably been studying her, planning how to exploit her professional connections for criminal purposes. The friendly neighbor routine, the casual conversations, even the fake emergencies, all of it had been preparation for a larger con. When the police finally moved to arrest Emma, they discovered she'd already fled. Her house was empty except for a few pieces of furniture and a note addressed to Sarah. "Thanks for being such an observant neighbor. Too bad you figured it out too late to save everyone. Some people are just born to be prey." Detective Rodriguez explained that Emma had probably been monitoring their investigation, possibly through hacked devices or surveillance equipment. "She's done this before," the detective said grimly. "She always seems to know when we're closing in." They found evidence that Emma had been planning to frame Sarah for. If this psychological thriller kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more dark psychology stories that will change how you see people forever. Which warning sign shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments below.